Hello, my beguiling art sluts. You're listening to Artgasm. This is Allison Moon, and this is the podcast all about the intersections of art and sexuality. I am so excited for today's interview. I spoke with sex workers' rights advocate, public intellectual, and really just super smart, interesting guy, Connor Habib. I've been very curious about him for a very long time, and I start the interview by telling him how nervous I was, and it turned into one of my most favorite conversations so far. I'm excited to deliver this one to you because, Matt, the past couple of episodes have been very nuts and bolts oriented, I think. We talk a little bit about theory, but we talk a lot about the business of being a working artist in sexuality themed things, which is great, and that's what Artgasm is all about. But I also really enjoyed this conversation because we talk a lot about the theory, the ideas, some of the crunchy stuff beneath the surface of why people do the things that we do, why we choose the things that we choose, and all of the politics and culture surrounding them. And I could talk to Connor for hours and hours, and I'm so glad that I get to share this interview with you today. Before we get to that, I just have a couple of announcements, no news stories that I want to dive into, but one thing is that if you are in the Portland, Oregon area, if you're in the Pacific Northwest, I am doing a reading of my new stage play. It is part of a festival called the Come Inside Festival, which is all about performance and sexuality. It's created by Eleanor Kathleen O'Brien, who is one of my Patreon supporters, and also I hope to interview on a future episode. But this is it's a whole festival all about different kinds of performance around sexuality. And it's got a lot of one-person shows, a lot of burlesque type things, and then I'm presenting my play. And I'm super excited. I'm in the casting process right now, and I will be delivering this as a staged reading, so it's going to be a cheaper price point. And what's super cool about this, to me at least, is that it will include a talk back after the show where people who see the show will have an opportunity to share their thoughts, and those thoughts may be instructive to me as I rewrite the play for hopefully a future full production. So I'm really excited about that. So if you're the kind of person who likes having opinions about art, and I have a feeling if you're listening to this, you're one of those people, I would love for you to come. The tickets are only $10, and it's going to be at the Coho Theater in Portland on Monday, October 8th. The evening of Monday, October 8th, which is, I think, a bank holiday for a lot of people. But it's in the evening. I would love to see you there. I would love for you, if you're a listener, to introduce yourself to me after the show. I will be there, obviously, taking furious notes and trying not to throw up. It's going to be great. So please do check that out. I'll include the link to the Facebook event, which unfortunately I think the Facebook event is the only place where you can get information on it, but it is a public event, so you can see at least the details. But tickets are only available at the door, so there's no pre-sale, which is hard to get people out for. So please, mark your calendars and come out and help me understand how to make my writing better for y'all. Also, just another shout out to all my Patreon supporters. I recently got labeled as adult on Patreon, which is amusing considering there are literally no pictures whatsoever on my Patreon, just conversation. So that's a little frustrating. And being marked as adult on Patreon means that you aren't available in search. So I will not be able to be found organically by people looking for things like our podcast on Patreon, which is a total bummer. I know a lot of people in the sex positive world have been trying really hard to get Patreon to change their terms around that, to change their way that they evaluate what counts as adult. And unfortunately, like a lot of other different ways that people organize themselves online these days, even acknowledging the existence of sex and having frank conversations about it is considered often to be problematic. And so in my world as a sex educator, we call that the sex ghetto, which I know is problematic for its own reasons, but it is definitely a way in which people who have conversations about sex are often pushed aside. On Facebook, we can't advertise, even, programs that just talk about like empowerment. Obviously, Instagram, we're all very familiar with the whole female nipple situation, and it creates a lot of frustration for a lot of us around just being able to get our ideas out into the world widely, especially to people who need them the most, which is to say people who have maybe some really negative, really problematic views around sexuality and people who engage in sexuality in any sort of frank and rational way. And so it's frustrating to have to be in that world and to be treated that way. And again, Connor and I will talk about this a little bit more because Connor, as a sex worker, undoubtedly encounters that as well. So yeah, anyway, it makes it frustrating for me in a lot of ways to try and get the message out. So if you are curious about being a patron supporter, I really encourage you to check it out. It's patreon.com/Artgasm, and you can get access to special episodes I record only for my patrons. And you can also ask questions that I can sometimes ask future guests or create entire episodes around. I recently got a question from one of my patron supporters that I actually was able to integrate into a future interview that you will be hearing in the coming months. So if you are interested in being engaged a little bit more with the podcast, please consider being a sort of supporter on Patreon. It really makes a huge difference to how I can run these things and how I can spread the word. All right. So with that out of the way, allow me to introduce to you Connor Habib. Connor has his own podcast. I will share the link in the show notes, but it's Against Everyone with Connor Habib. And he has really great conversations, and a lot of his conversations are videoed as well. So if you're the kind of person who enjoys engaging visually with conversation, that's a really cool option that he has, and all the stuff is on YouTube, but also I encourage you to go visit all of his social media, all of which I will share links to in the show notes and also at the end of the show. I know you do this already too, so yeah. You're like, you have opinions. Yes, I do admit, like, I was a little bit nervous reaching out to you because I don't know if you have a reputation
of what, being a jerk.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I think just, maybe combative is the right word.
It's so funny. Like, I think the only reason why I have that reputation is because, like, when I don't know someone and they say, and like their first introduction to me is like disagreeing with me on Twitter, I'm a dick because I'm like, that's rude. Leave me alone. Why would you do that? And so then people are like, oh, you're so sensitive. And I'm like, no, I just, like, if someone said hi to me in person and then they would, like, disagreed with me, I'd be like, fuck, like, leave me the fuck alone. Yeah. But, like, no, I'm like a totally nice person. I'm so fucking nice, you assholes.
Fuck you. Yeah, it's funny because, like, I think, I never experienced that of you. I mean, I never saw something that was like, oh god, this guy's a jerk, but I definitely feel like you just don't suffer fools.
No, I definitely do not. I don't have any patience. I don't have any time for it, and, like, I think also it's, like, on sort of a more personal level, like, if I want to take on the responsibility of that and not just project it onto them and be like, you guys are dumb. Like, I think when I am trying to express something and I know it's, like, a complicated topic and like, people don't get it. Like, a lot of times people do get it, but, like, people don't get it. I feel isolated. Like, I feel like, shit, I can't express this without doing 100 backbends to, like, get down into the nitty gritty to explain every part. And that feels isolating, and that is, like, a shitty feeling. Mm-hmm. So then when someone comes at me out of that place, then I'm just like, fuck you. Like, I'm already, like, a little bit on edge, but I'm not, I don't, but I also don't have time for stupid bullshit. I've got too much of my own stupid bullshit to deal with anybody else's.
Yeah, right. I feel like Twitter's one of those places where it's like, because it flattens discourse so much and it, like, reduces. I mean, right now I feel like I'm frustrated by the lack of nuance in pretty much every kind of conversation that I have that isn't in person. And I feel like Twitter is like the nuance removing machine. And so it's really frustrating to kind of not be able to control for tone of voice and eye contact and all the things that humans have evolved to, like, soften our ability to talk to each other.
Right, totally.
So I find it incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, that, like, old story about, it was, like, one of the Real Housewives, and this media analyst Doug Rushkoff was writing about how, like, they kept getting in fights with each other, and he didn't understand why they kept getting in fights. Now, of course, there's an aspect of it where it's like the producers were goading them into fighting. Sure. But then he also realized that they all had Botox, so they couldn't move their eyebrows and give, like, regular eye and eyebrow signals to, like, establish tone, and that's why they were fighting. So not only removing, like, it's like Twitter's, like, ultimate full body Botox. Like, you have no idea what is coming across in that.
Yeah, like these disembodied consciousnesses.
Exactly.
And even removing, like, the tone of voice. That's amazing. Wow. I mean, so have you moved in towards, like, more of a, like, media analysis, public intellectual thing these days, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what I always wanted to do. For me, sex is like, in some weird way, like it could have been, like the sex is the sort of center of it. In some ways, it could have been anything, like as like a springboard for looking at the human condition. Like I think when people are responsible intellectuals, what they do is they take a subject and then they use the rest of the world to look at that subject, to understand it deeply, and then they can carry some of the knowledge back out into the world. The sort of irresponsible version is like, you know about one thing and you sort of force that on everything else. So like if you know, like the classic example are the guys who are like evolutionary biologists that think that they can explain everything by like talking about, by talking about that. But like it could be anything else. It could be someone who's into socialist economics and using that as their lens for everything they see. But it's like, no, use everything else to understand your topic, and then that can generate some wisdom about the rest of the world. So sex for me was the focal point, and for various reasons. But in some weird way, it probably could have been almost anything.
Do you think, sex or porn or both?
It was really sex. I mean, porn was a way to make sex public, like make my interest in sex public and unavoidably so. Like I talk about it that way. Usually it's like I want to throw a wrench in the gears of my future. Like I want to fuck it up. And like, and it did. That's, I think I wanted to make it unhideable in a way, and porn was the best way to do that.
What about making it unhideable felt useful to you?
Well, I mean, first of all, there was just the fact that it was hidden, the fact that sex is hidden all the time in different ways. Like people always talk about it being, we live in some hypersexualized culture, but it's not really true. We live in like a hyper arousal culture, but it's like the way I say it is, when people say sex sells, I'm like, no, it doesn't. Arousal sells, but you don't have a billboard with like a giant pussy and a giant dick and it says like, buy Budweiser. It's not like, where they're like fucking, it's like, it's not that. It's like there's this arousal and then it reroutes the arousal into buying a product, right? So there's no, and not that penetration is the only way that sex appears, but I'm just saying there's certain uses of sex, of certain parts of it, certain aspects of it. So all these parts of it that are also hidden. And I thought, or even in conversation, like we hide it away. It's like if you want to talk to your friend about sex and you're in line at the grocery store and there's like an old lady behind you. That's a classic example. For some reason, old ladies have never had sex. But like there's an old lady behind you. You don't want to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And so that it's hidden there. And so I thought, well, if I do this thing sort of that makes it completely public, then, small questions, like small talk questions, like, what do you do for a living? Like, then they become really charged with depth. And that for me was really appealing. Also partially just because small talk makes me want to blow my brains out. So, I mean, I could do it, but it just like, I prefer to talk about, deeper things. So I think that it had all those levels of, I want to sort of bring it out. Yeah.
Do you ever find that you do choose to closet yourself in certain situations?
Well, not for the reason, I mean, maybe, I'm sure I do, but it'd be hard for me to locate those, just because like that's where I am repressing. So you don't often notice where you're repressing yourself. Right? Yeah. But less, I think, than most people. Sometimes I don't talk about stuff because I don't want it to overwhelm everybody else's access to having their own conversations about things. And especially when I was doing a lot of porn, which I don't really do that much anymore, it was like, not that I won't do more in the future, but just right now I'm not. But it's like, you're in a conversation with 3 people, you bring up porn, then suddenly everybody's asking you. And I wouldn't have minded fielding the questions, but I wanted everybody else to be able to talk about their lives too, and it ends up really overtaking. I noticed, not because I'm so interesting, anybody could have said it, you know, it's not just me. So because it's repressed elsewhere, so like you bring that to the table and suddenly everybody's like, oh, there's a chance to discuss this, you know.
That's interesting. Like I feel like there have been, I don't have many opportunities to code switch because, you know, I'm a white queer who lives in queer areas, so I don't often have to be afraid of that. But I do visit my folks in North Carolina and their friends, and I'll just use the word queer casually, and then I can feel them like want to ask questions, but then they don't want to use the word because it's still very much a slur to them. And it's like, oh right, like we have a completely different lexicon for being able to talk about this stuff, and it almost it adds a chilling effect to the conversation because they're so afraid of walking on some sort of, you know, lexicological landmine. So I just find that kind of strange to see how I closet myself almost out of like politeness so that I don't have to make other people feel like uncomfortable that they're gonna.
Yeah, I like your term too. Not to bring a lexicological landmine.
Maybe I should just
queer.
Point to it. Exactly. Cool. So, I mean, in terms of like what you have, like when you say like using the sex of, or the lens of sex to kind of inform the ways that you think about the rest of the world, like how do you find that has, after having a career in sex, how has that informed your kind of intellectual pursuits?
Oh, I mean, in so many ways, it's like sex. So in spite of me saying it could have been anything, I then realized, I think, that sex is probably one of the most profound teachers, and that's how I view it. I view it as a teacher, so you follow it. You don't, you know, I'll say it's a mystery. It's like you can always learn more from sex than you can about it. It's always a step ahead of you, and so you just follow it. And as I followed it, every step along the way, it would reveal something to me. One of the things, for instance, that it revealed to me was basically how racist I was, right? So like this was like something that, and this has all other kinds of implications as well, but like, you know, there's this whole question of, oh, well, if you don't want to have sex with someone, you know, if you're only attracted to white people, like that's not racist, that's just your desire, right? And what I learned was from being cast in scenes with people who were not, you know, I mean, I'm half white, but I mostly grew up almost exclusively around white people, except for my father's Arab side of the family, right? So, because I grew up in small town Pennsylvania, and you know, those were the kinds of people that informed my desires when I was growing up. And so then I'd be cast in scenes with guys who were not white, or when I was escorting, I'd be hired by clients who were not white, and I'd be like, okay, well, I gotta figure out my way in, right? And then when I did, after the experience, it like opened up my attraction to people of different races and different body types and different, and I realized then, like, oh, like if people would just sort of I mean, this is a difficult thing for people to sort of hear and get on board with because of current conversations of consent, but let me just say it this way, like if you would kind of just demand of yourself that you would have sex with people that you weren't attracted to, you would learn a lot about why you weren't attracted to them, and you would also subsequently probably attracted to more people eventually. And so sex led me through all my own weird culturally conditioned preferences. I'm not saying that I'm some enlightened being because I had you know, black guys as scene partners. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that I understand more about the sort of obstacles in my desires, and I understand my desires better, and I understand all that just from following, you know, the sex that was put in front of me as available, you know. And I think so that's one example. I mean, there are so many examples that I could go on and on, but I think that that's one that I wish people would sort of follow a little bit more. And now it's a little bit of a contradictory message, because on the one hand I'm saying follow your desires, and on the other hand I'm saying do things that don't immediately fall into your desired set. But what I sort of think that those two things go hand in hand, because it's like, well, if you decide to, if you understand that your sexual desires are not necessarily always clear or always your own, then you can begin to put yourself in situations that you might not necessarily at first always throw yourself into. And so I think that from being a sex worker, but also just from following sex, I've learned.
Yeah, Jeanette Winterson said something about, I actually quoted her in one of my books because, to paraphrase, she says, like, you should absolutely have beliefs, and then you should 100% be willing to interrogate those beliefs. Because if the beliefs stand the test of interrogation and you still have them, then that means that they're real.
Right.
Everything else is the ones that will fall apart are the ones you should be ridding yourself of anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and the way I would bring that into, well, I mean, she probably was related to sex in some way, knowing her, but like the way that I would bring that into the sexual sphere is like nobody has a right to push you beyond your own boundaries, right? Like you have sexual boundaries, those are yours, and nobody has a right to like violate that. However, you also have a duty and a responsibility to investigate and maybe even dissolve a lot of those boundaries on your own, in ways that you might find safe, perhaps uncomfortable, but nevertheless safe or experimental for yourself. And I think that if you're not doing that dual work, which is like learning how to say no and yes to others and to yourself, and learning how to listen to no and yes to others, like if you're not doing that dual work of like the inner stuff as well as the outer communication and listening, then you end up using your boundaries as weapons against people, you know, and you also are not really understanding yourself. A real no and a real yes comes from a free place, you know, and that's not accessible to most people immediately, and that's totally understandable. But don't you want to get there? Don't you want to know don't you want to know the certainty and depth and complexity and contours of your no's and yeses, you know? Yeah,
and I think that like learning to interrogate those differences is such a skill set that is so not easy for a lot of people. But like, yeah, I mean, in sex ed, I often call them like embodied yes and embodied no, where you can feel like fuck no or fuck yes.
Right.
But also sometimes what feels like a no is actually a nervous yes. Like, I'm scared of how much I want this, or I'm excited by this, but I've never done it before, or I like you so much, I don't want to fuck it up. And then, so now I'm going to run in the opposite direction.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's a good way to say it. And I think, you know, if you just take the experiences of most, at least, yeah, I would still say most, like, young gay guys, where you have the entirety of culture still, in most places, saying this is wrong, don't do this. Then when you have sex and you have your first sexual experiences, like, you are often during that experience even, the whole way plagued with thoughts of no as you're saying yes. Now, if we follow this idea of enthusiastic consent, which I think is actually a really bad concept, then every young gay guy is being raped every single time he has sex when he's younger, because there are cultural factors that influence our feelings of no and yes as our feelings behind our no's and yeses. So, like, I would suck a guy's dick, and then he would leave, and I would literally stand, like, just a drama queen, stand in the mirror and in front of the mirror and slap myself in the face and be like, never again, you know? And, like, and I knew during those experiences I felt like shit while they were going on, but I also knew I wanted to undergo them. And it's like this idea that what I would say would be entirely my own opinion is not true when it comes to people who are in marginalized and oppressed groups. So we can't apply these concepts across the board in the same way. You mean
enthusiastic consent?
Yeah, I mean, all these concepts of what constitutes no and yes, they change in different circumstances. And I think we owe it to ourselves to look at them in those complex and varied ways. And also, and I don't think it's, I think that it's sad that even saying something like that can really get people like nervous or angry. And it's, to me, that's like, well, we're different people. Like, isn't that part of the entirety of like this concept of consent, is that this is about how we're individuated, and like, and so our answers and our feelings behind those answers might be different. And if you don't believe in that, why do you believe in consent at all?
Right.
You know, because this is about my yes and my no, you know?
Yes, I mean, I think people are trying to like codify a new set of rules for society to follow to not be rapists, right? Which is good. I think that's a very noble endeavor, but when we just use these kinds of giant concepts like enthusiastic consent, while at the same time we're talking about sex work, and it's like, well, so if you are getting paid, are you super enthusiastic? If you're getting paid to fuck somebody you don't actually like as a human, but you're still wanting to do the job, like how can we negotiate on one end on the sex positive scale of being like enthusiastic consent or nothing, and on the other end of the scale is like there's actually a lot of different reasons to engage in sex with somebody, and maybe only one of those is that you're really excited about that person,
right? And what does it do? So like, I spoke at a university earlier a few months ago. I spoke at this university, and a woman from the audience, I mean, she was probably 18 or 19, came up to me afterward, and she was like, I feel like the guys on this campus, they ask, is this okay? Is this okay? Because they feel that they have to. And that makes sex so awful for us. And I was like, that's really interesting. Like, not just thinking about what this might give to stop sexual violence, but also like she was representing other women. I trust that what she was saying did represent more than just herself, but maybe not everybody. But for her to say, like, I'm losing what I'm seeking by having to avoid danger.
Yeah.
You know? And I think a lot of people are saying those kinds of things, but usually it's in this shitty, like, dude way. Like, oh, like, now I have to ask to, like, grab her tits at the office. You know, it's like that kind of dumb bullshit, like, whining. But when you hear it from people that, you know, it's supposedly supposed to protect. As someone who's a sex worker, I'm very vigilant about those moments, because I know that people are constantly trying to protect sex workers from things that they did not ask to be protected by. You know?
Well, it's funny because I have almost the exact opposite. Well, not the exact opposite, but I have a very different experience with talking with young people, or not even just young people, but as a sex educator, a lot of men that come to my classes, so that's already self-selected, but they're very much on board, right? They're like, sure, just teach us what to do to be good in bed with people, and we will do the thing. Like, they're very eager, right? And I love those guys. And then I have a lot of women who are like, super like, ugh, why do they keep on? I just want him to just take me.
Right.
And it's like, oh, guys, you're killing me. And so I think a lot of the sex education that I'm still seeing, and more of like the mainstream world, like the people who get invited on Dr. Phil to talk, they're very much about polarity, right? They very much like, they think that women want to surrender and men want to take, and you have to create a space in which those two things can coexist. But right now with the dialogue that's happening in culture around, like, we have to get granular and we have to talk it out, and I'm sorry, you're gonna have less hot sex for like the next couple of years if you're having to deal with consent, but ultimately it's kind of, I think, a good thing to raise the culture around.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that the conversation is important. I don't know that it has to affect sex in any sort of like deadening way. I think that the way that we're having the conversation now is doing that. And part of that is because there's too much unexamined about sex altogether, that like this conversation about consent is arising in a sex negative repressed culture. So it can't, and then we expect it to do all the work for that, and that's not the only thing we need to be talking about. There's so much else. And so when we just have this sort of isolated, particularly on college campuses, I mean, what a weird place for this to happen too. Obviously there are sexual assaults on college campuses, but they're much safer places than, places for people who are that age that don't go to college. Or, so the people that are being sort of located as you're in the place of danger are actually like in one of the most safe places for someone that age.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, then you have it in this like place where it's like, okay, kids, go to college. Wait. We've got all this stuff to tell you. And by the way, like something I say to college students is like, did you consent to have a threesome with the author of your code of conduct manual? Because they're there every time you guys are having sex, right? And so for me, it's like, and that's the way I talk about it all the time, is like, we don't get to consent to the kind of consent we get. And that's a problem, and that's actually historically with conversations about consent been a problem for a long time, whether it's saying, whether it's as a sex worker, I know like sex work exclusionary radical feminists saying that even if I say I consent to doing sex work or being in porn, I'm actually deluding myself and I'm like a victim of patriarchy. Or if you're a straight male porn star, you're a rapist. Even if or saying like, white women having sex with black men at a certain point in our culture's history were always being raped because no white woman would consent to having sex with a black man. With a black man, so the black men were like thrown in jail. Or it could be the ways that gay men were talked about. Who the idea being here, not that all these things are necessarily the same, but that consent is always conditioned by not just the two people who are consenting to each other. It's always conditioned by cultural forces, and we need to investigate those as well while we have this conversation. But we're not doing that, and that to me that's a problem.
Well, I mean, it's like the conversation just gets so nebulous, right? It's like talking about capitalism without talking about race. It's like, well, okay, so like let's envision the America we want. It's like, well, it can't happen. It is literally impossible because everything's baked in.
Yeah.
And so it's like you can either try and spend the next 300 years excising, the specter of slavery from America and then rebuilding it there, or just kind of having to come up with something completely different. But you can't really unbake that cake,
Yeah, I mean, it will never lose the things that led up to this moment. That's how the past works, right? but we can have bigger and more radical conversations about things, And I think really looking into the past, but also just looking at the present, looking at. And I don't just mean the present political moment. I mean looking at yourself in this moment. Like, who am I? Why do I want what I want? What are my feelings? Where are they coming from? Like, that's all so important, and way more important, really, than hearing the correct sex education instruction or hearing the correct cultural instruction or some talking point or dumb Twitter, meme or whatever. And, I think that would do us a lot of good.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I'm a little bit, maybe I'm just particularly sad these days about the state of things. But I guess that's just going to be the new normal for a lot of us. But like, I think I am bemoaning the lack of nuance in the public discourse. And maybe it's that a lot of us need to spend more time just not sharing our immediate knee-jerk reactions to things. But I do find like, I want... Every time I see somebody who tries to bring nuance to the Me Too conversation, for instance, it's like immediately shut down by a lot of very angry people. And often I see it's because it's a reaction of people who are in pain and who need to lash out at anything. And so they grab onto the thing that they can lash out at as opposed to the actual thing or person that hurt them, right? And so it's kind of the displaced anger. But I do find myself as a sex professional worried about the ability for us to have radical conversations. Like even the skill sets required feel like they're getting harder to find.
Yeah, unfortunately, one of those skills right now is being able to take a lot of people being angry at you, right? I can do that. I don't like doing it, but I can, know. And
how'd you learn how to do that, if you don't mind me asking?
Part of it was just growing up with abuse, right? So it's like I became calm in the face of a storm, So it was like, all right, I'm not going to validate the gestures of the abuser. I'm just going to be calm, which usually enrages people more.
Yep.
But they also can't get to you. Like, that starts turning inward, and they start sort of eating themselves in a way. But it's also, I think, it's hard to talk about these things without sounding like a total egotist, but it's something like, I know that my feelings are pure in this. Like, I know that, like, it really is about saying the thing and helping people. And if I have to take the hit for that, I can deal. I don't want to, but that's my integrity, so I just stand in it, as much as I can. I mean, I'm not perfect, certainly. I say and parrot all kinds of dumb shit, you know what I mean? But I think, but not everybody has to take that up. I understand that that's difficult, and it's not, and it is a skill. I really want to teach a workshop on that or something. Like, how do you deal with people being angry that you're saying these sort of countercultural things? Like, how do you deal with that intensity? And without being like a monster yourself, because that's how people deal with it. And that more than like me sort of like losing it and breaking down and like being really sad or feeling wounded, I can become like an angry like clapbacker, as you brought up right at the beginning of the show. But I think that I think it's something about, honestly, and I don't mean this to sort of turn off any atheists, but I think there's a spiritual component to it. It's like, if you believe in something that's larger than yourself, and it doesn't have to be God, but if you have something inwardly or that can make you feel calm. And if it makes you feel agitated and angry, then you, as Jeanette Winterson says, you might not believe it. So people get super defensive about whether it's a spiritual thing or an atheist thing or an economic thing or whatever, their ideology or their spirituality, like, they might not be so set in it.
Yeah, I think that's actually what I'm seeing a lot of, is the rage that comes from the indecisiveness of things. So it's like we kind of think, oh yes, enthusiastic consent, that's the hill we need to die on now. And then people start poking and tearing apart, or not tearing apart, but kind of picking that apart. And they're like, actually, maybe it's not the panacea that we think it is. Right. And I think people are really eager to find those panaceas, because we're all in a lot of pain right now. And anything that feels like a good, easy answer, I think a lot of people are trying to gravitate towards.
Yeah. And I also think, I agree with you, and I think that there's an aspect, this thing that we're undergoing right now, which is a glorification of unhealable victimhood, and the sort of the idea that what you've suffered has cultural cachet. Now, obviously, I don't think that means people haven't suffered, but the voices we pay attention to, for some reason, it's like, if something bad happens to you and you just report that a bad thing happened to you, you can get a lot of like praise now. And what I'm definitely not saying is like, oh, so like people are just doing it just for the likes. No, it's hard to report. I'm saying that there's a specific thing going on in our culture right now that somehow has weighted that a little bit too much from my perspective, that like it's become less about what you do with your victimhood, what you do with the terrible things that have happened to you, than just that they have happened in a way. And I think a big part of that is not about, again, how like ridiculous the victimhood is, but that we live in a culture right now that people feel they have to claim victimhood to be heard. And that to me is something that we can do something about right now, which is like, we can say, look, maybe the things that happen to you are not the worst unhealable things, and you still deserve compassion and help. And that's for me, the message that I would sort of put out there about these kinds of things is like, so when we're talking about hurt and responding from a place of hurt, or, you know, reporting whatever kinds of violations we've had in our lives, and I think a lot of us have had some sort of, I mean, really egregious, shitty things happen to us in our lives, that we don't have to adopt a language of unhealable trauma, like totally fucked up forever, never will I recover, never can I forgive the person that did this to me, blah, 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 blah. We should be able to say, hey, something happened. It didn't feel good. I don't know what to do with this. I'm a little fucked up. Can you help me? And people should say, yes, I can help you. And then beyond that, we also have to say, okay, now what do we do with these people that have committed the offense? Because we don't have any system really for dealing with that either, other than just sort of adopting and mirroring the way the state does it.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like people are starting to, or at least more of the radical people are saying like restorative justice, which I totally believe is a very useful tool, but you need to A, understand how it works, and B, everybody has to be kind of on board. Right. Because like if you're just looking for the hammer of justice, then you're using the carceral system, even though a lot of us are against the carceral system, but it feels really good to say now you're, you know, excised from our community, or now you're canceled or whatever. And so it kind of preserves this tribalism of like, we're just going to kick out who we don't like. But what happens when the person's like, no, I'm here for restorative justice, like help me get better. Now the community has to actually put our money where our mouth is and help that person get better.
Yeah, and I find it, you know, it's like all the parts of our culture when we deal with that are just really just fucked. Like, so who was it that was saying, like the Joy Reid thing, right? Like, so Joy Reid, if the people who are listening don't know, is like this pundit who, she's like a Democrat pundit, and she was like revealed to have all these like shitty homophobic emails, you know, and statements and stuff in the past, and she lied about, I mean, she's very clear that she's lying about, like, she was like, I was hacked. I mean, it was just like, it's so preposterous. And so what people's response is like, well, she's not that person anymore, and we need to celebrate that she's a better person now. And for me, like, that part is broken too. It's like, I'm not going to celebrate that. I can forgive and let go, and then see what she does from here. Right. And I'll celebrate the good shit she does from here. But there's also this idea now that if you're a bad person and you like make amends for like the shit you did and apologize, then that needs to be celebrated. Like, that's the contending voice with don't ever forgive anybody. And it's like, no, but how about neither of those? Like, people do shitty things. We've all done shitty things. Now, I'm not saying we've all done the same level of horribleness, but we've all done shitty things, and we're certainly all implicated in really shitty social dynamics with each other in this culture. So get to the point where, like, you're just sort of baseline, like sort of like a null set, like you're just a zero. Yeah. And then what you do after that, then, like, I'll take that on, you know, and maybe celebrate some of that. So I just think that what you're talking about is, like, even the people that are saying restorative justice, like, sometimes they're not, you know, like, not, like you said, they don't know. You said we need to learn how to do that, right? And we need to, like, learn how to do that part too.
Yeah, you know? Yeah. And I feel like so much of it hinges on, like, well, the kind of, like, trying to get as many people to forgive you at once as possible, right? Like, it becomes like this gamification. And so it like hinges on the apology, right? Like, oh, did they apologize perfectly? And if not, then you're still on the track of having to earn back love and trust. And if you apologize perfectly, then you've earned back. Like, I see, like, the Dan Harmon thing was such an interesting example. Did you follow that at all?
No, I don't know that one.
Yeah, so
there's so many to, like, keep up with now.
Yeah, so one of the former writers on Community called out Dan Harmon for being basically a shitty sexist to her while she was working for him, and it all came out on Twitter and kind of was a lot of things. And then Dan Harmon apologized on his podcast, and a lot of people think that he nailed it. It was a good apology. I noticed that the big difference was that you could hear his voice. Again, a lot of these apologies are written, so you could hear his tone of a voice. He was controlling the space, but he's also a writer. And he checked off all the boxes. And I'm not saying it wasn't sincere, but people are holding that up as like, this is how you apologize.
Right.
And then, of course, the woman who accused him accepted. And it was all kind of done in like a week, right? It was like, call out, apology, accept, and we're all just right back to where we were. We can still enjoy Dan Harmon's creations, and everything's kind of, it felt satisfying in this like, great, the narrative arc is closed. And when the narrative arc doesn't get closed because of a shitty apology or because somebody's not willing to accept the apology or any of these things, it creates this like open loop at which we have to see if we have to still be mad at somebody months later because we haven't figured out whether or not they did all the things they need to do.
Well, I mean, it's interesting too. It's like, I mean, the first thing is like, who needs to accept the apology? Like that part is also strange to me when someone does their apology in writing and it's clumsy because we don't have cultural training for apologizing either. You know, the most we get is like the playground, like apologize to the other kid for stealing their toy or whatever. Like we don't know. And certainly kids parrot apologies, right? They don't feel them, right? So, we don't really have a lot of ideas of how to like properly apologize or what that means. But then the people who are like have nothing to do with the situation are like, this is a phony apology and blah blah. I'm like, but it wasn't to you. Like I get, and so those apologies, like you said, being forgiven by everybody at once, it's like that also is a problem. It's like not everybody needs to be involved in whether or not the apology was genuine or like to be satisfied. But then there was another point I wanted to make, which was about we also know, like when you're in a relationship with someone and they apologize to you, like think about relationships you've been in where you've apologized and the person is like, no, you need to say this, not this. And like they demand the words that you use. Those people are fucking nightmares to be in relationships with, and I'm not saying that there aren't good or bad apologies. Like if you're just like, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Like, of course that's shitty. Of course you want to hear remorse. You want to hear, I'm going to try to, listen to you more in the future. You want to hear all that kind of stuff from your partner. But there's also the version of like the partner who is unceasingly unforgiving and needs you to say the exact right things all the time to feel your apology when it's like, I'm doing what I did. Now it's on you. Like I can't absorb all the responsibility for your feelings. Now, of course, I understand that some people's apologies seem genuine, don't seem genuine. Some of them are genuine, not genuine when it comes to these public apologies from public figures. But if we bring that to our personal lives, we can see like, would I want to be in a relationship with like me when I'm like demanding an apology from a stranger that they say specific things? Like that would suck, in a lot of cases. So I think it's important to think about what we would want in our personal lives, And I can even hear, like, as I say these things, like, the response is like, well, like, in my personal life, like, I wouldn't support, like, someone that sexually harassed, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you probably have. First of all, we all have, in one way or another. But it's like, so, but second of all, it's like, I can hear, like, even as we have these conversations, you can almost feel the ways that anger could thread into the things that you're saying, so strange.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I can't escape like the voices. I mean, the very like the constellation of different opinions that I'm always absorbing and I'm always modulating for, right? And I think this is one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you, because I'm like, wow, like Connor doesn't seem afraid to say something controversial, even if it means that like he will be again like excommunicated from the tribe, whatever that tribe is, And I feel like walking where I am right now, like just being a person and being a person who has a somewhat of a social media presence, but now also like putting myself out there in different ways and being a sex educator, which has this like assumptions of social justice beliefs associated with it. Like to present yourself as having anything that even strays slightly from the party line is really scary. Like I feel like, wow, like I'm very aware of like how, even just inviting certain people onto the podcast is now like you're aligning yourself with their belief system.
Right.
And I'm like, wow, this is, and I'm fairly young, but I still feel like I remember a time in which you could have friendships or conversations with people that didn't agree with you in every possible way. And that wasn't considered some sort of moral defect.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so I totally hear that, those intensities from other people as well. And I feel like, I feel them. I think, I've had like 2 Twitter dog piles now where it was like...
Not sexy ones, right?
No, right. Yeah. Not like sexy puppy piles, but it was like, and the first one was like all day and it was like thousands of responses. And it was for me saying, sex is not supposed to be enjoyable. And all the sex workers and a lot of the LGBT people following me got that immediately. And it was for them, you know? And it was basically like, don't be sold this myth. Like, don't feel bad about it, you know? But what it was taken up by this weird conjunction of, there were like a few comedians in New York who are like, so I shouldn't insult them, but like the feminist comedians, okay? And they took it, without knowing anything about me, of course, to mean that I was saying, just lay back and take it.
Oh, Jesus.
Right. And then this weird conjunction between them and these like dude bros that were like, sounds like you got no dick game, bro. Like, you can't make her enjoy it. And I was like,
First of all.
Yeah, exactly, right? But that was like thousands of people that day. And I at first was defending myself, but at a certain point I was like, I just kept blocking people because I didn't want it to spread.
Yeah.
And I like cried at the end of the day, not because I was like, I was just like exhausted.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit, that's so much hate to take on in like one day, right? And then there was another one when I said something about, it was like when the Kevin Spacey allegations came up, and I was like, yes, let's listen to this person. And at the same time, I can see it from a mile away that this is going to be this moment, if we're not careful, where all gay people have to listen to how straight people run their consent. And there are differences historically and there are differences now. But of course, taken up like very quickly by a lot of like sort of neoliberal millennial gays as like, no, they weren't just millennials. Like that's a dumb way to label them. But like a lot of like neoliberal, like a lot of like white, like, gay marriage dudes, we'll just say, like, who are like, oh, you just rape apologist. You don't care that like he raped like a kid, and I was like, no, like I'm not. And of course, again, like all these like queer people and sex workers and stuff, they got it, right away. But there was this sort of willful, like I need to be angry. So going through those experiences also kind of led me like, oh, this is what that's like. That sucks. Okay, now I'm all right, And so I think. And all I had to do to like get away with it, get away from it. That's a nice Freudian slip. To get away from it, all I had to do to get away with defending Kevin Spacey.
If you're one of those pesky kids.
Yeah, right. Was turn my computer and my phone off.
Yeah.
And realize that the world was so big. And when I did that, I was like, oh, like there's so much breathing room. And it's so condensed and claustrophobic in that little screen that it feels like something, And so, again, that's this version of, if you're in touch with something that would be bigger, maybe it doesn't even have to be bigger than yourself. Maybe just be bigger than your computer. You can feel that. And I understand it's not, it goes beyond that for some people that are harassed online. Like it goes into like serious, what I would consider serious doxing, where like someone's pictures of their house and their address are posted, or they're, getting harassed on the streets or whatever. But mostly it doesn't go there, so I don't know. I think that that's part of it too, is having experienced it in a shitty way and being like, oh, I'm okay.
Yeah. Do you feel like your history kind of coming up in academia help train you, like do adrenaline training too?
Like, why would that help, do you think? I feel like that would make me like worse.
Oh, really?
I don't know.
I guess like, and I have a bachelor's degree, but then I stopped, and I feel like it was in the sciences, so there wasn't exactly a whole lot of debate. But I guess maybe I'm thinking I have this idealized view of like academia where it's like a bunch of intelligent, informed people having vehement discussions on opposite sides of a point and being not afraid to then also still be friends or lovers afterwards.
You know what it's more like? That is a nice version of it, I suppose. Although that would drive me crazy too, because I don't like when people disagree with me. But I don't dislike. Well, we'll get back to that. But but it's not like that. It's more like you're sitting in a room with 5 people who you're like, I really don't know why I should take this person seriously at all. Yet I have to sit here for 3 hours of this class and listen to them report their opinion to me. So in some ways that does prepare you, I suppose.
Why are you getting paid so much for this?
For Twitter, where you're just like, I guess like, I guess I can just endure people like saying stuff when I don't take it serious. But in those situations, you have to be like, the only way to get through grad school, a lot of people say this, especially if they go to grad school for art, of some form of art, is like you just have to do your own work. And that can be the thing that's bigger than yourself too, where I'm just like, just keep my head down, I got shit to do, like I'm gonna actually do it, think through it, do my own work, read, write, all that kind of stuff. And then it kind of takes the pressure off of trying to deal with what other people think or how they contend with you. I think also I'm starting to feel more and more that there's this real like illness, like it's a symptom of an illness online when people are not just trolling. It's not the content of what they're saying. It's not like someone comes to you and is like, I think your Twitter sucks. No one should do that to you because your Twitter's great. But yes, but like someone comes to you and says that, like it's the discontinuity between the degree of discontinuity between how they act online and how they act in person. Regardless of the content. It could be that they're really super nice, cheery people online and then they're like, crazed people in person, or maybe very bold and brave with their justice views online, but actually kind of cowardly and lazy in person. That the degree of discontinuity, I'm beginning to think more and more is like this kind of illness. And so that's something I've been trying to do, is like sync up. I'm actually going to try as best as I can to act online how I act in life. Even like the dumb, ugly, shitty parts of me, like they should be on there. I shouldn't try to purposefully make myself try to sound better. Like, because that's the thing I noticed the most, and this is the first thing you brought up, is the idea of someone coming up to me in person after hearing me talk about something and being like, I just don't disagree. I just don't agree with that. I disagree with that. I don't really like that. Nobody ever does that in person. I mean, sometimes they do, especially in San Francisco. But, I read an article by Malcolm Gladwell that said, anyway, but people don't really do that. So the thought of someone introducing themselves in that way, to me, I understand that online is a different format. It's a different way to interact. I understand that there are all sorts of things but that discontinuity between the way they act there and the way they act in person, I think that that's bad news. And more I'm like, oof, like the degree of discontinuity makes me, if it's really big, makes me kind of want to stay away from the person and not trust who they are.
Yeah, it feels like you're almost like kind of walking towards the ideal that a lot of these tech guys thought the internet was going to do for people, right? Like, we'll have this new age of transparency where we'll all be able to be ourselves fully, which is not at all what's ended up happening. But like the whole forcing, and like part of it's like the forced transparency, which is terrible in some ways for like sex workers and their names, right? Or anybody who has a different name online than they do in real life or whatever. So that's horrible and disgusting. But at the same time, like I definitely have found myself similarly, not with that intention, but similarly trying to just like not say shit I wouldn't just say to somebody's face. You know, like why would I think that would be appropriate online? Because it's even worse because all the context is removed and all my vocal inflection and all my eye contact and all my eyebrow raises.
Right.
Like, why would I think that it would be somehow better is because I'm braver that way, because it's, not nearly as scary to say something and then run away.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that someone might argue, well, it's because you have access to people that you wouldn't necessarily have access to in real life. But if you had access to those people in real life, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I think it's fine if someone is... The only time I think it's okay is if someone's a politician, honestly, because if they've actively decided to shape the affairs of the world, I'm not even talking about artists, really famous people, whatever. Even though they do, it's just a different set.
Yeah.
But if they're actively shaping the world and they've decided to step into that place, I feel like it's fine to tell somebody to fuck off. But that's a different thing. And those people literally had people with guns guarding them, so you could not go up to them and talk to them and say these things to their face.
Yeah.
So it's just a different situation. But like, why the fuck would you? I don't get why that would be the way that you would approach somebody anymore. And I've done it too, but I'm trying to not do it anymore because I really don't like it when people do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a tiny bit, I'm micro famous, right? And so I feel like I've never understood this in general, but now I even understand it less, of people who just tweet shitty things to celebrities,
right?
Because they seem to think that celebrities aren't they're so famous and rich that they don't care, that they're not human all of a sudden, and they don't have I remember when the whole doxing happened of all the celebrity women who had their naked pictures revealed online, and it's just that's a sex crime, people. That is a sex crime. And just because you have lots of millions of dollars and lots of lawyers, it does not mean that they are not now victims of a sex crime, and we're all complicit in this.
Right.
And it just was such a weird thing to see that people really do have this disconnect of when a person achieves a certain amount of fame, all of a sudden they become less human and less prone to, emotions. It's strange.
Yeah. And I think maybe some of that is so I don't want to... Let me try to say this in as complex a way as possible. So I agree with you that the sort of sex crime aspect of that it's terrible. The feeling of, okay, my naked pictures were leaked and now they're everywhere, right? And there's also a little bit of naivety there in some ways, cultural naivety, because... Well, the NSA has those pictures. Yeah. The NSA has naked pictures of all of us. And if we're going to aim our anger at somebody for a sex crime, what kind of world do we think we live in, and what kind of model of privacy do we think is available to us? And what might be gained from saying, well, actually, our naked bodies are available to a select group of people whenever they want. I mean, not as much. Well, we're told not as much anymore, but I fucking doubt it.
Yeah, no way.
And then also all our information. Google used to do the thing with Google Maps where they would actually point into your house and collect information from your computers when those cars went by.
Oh, whoa.
I mean, obviously Facebook is installs itself on everything you use. So this idea of our certain things being private and then someone leaks an aspect of that that's distasteful and that's the violation. It's yes, but that's nothing compared to the immense amount of that's happening constantly. So where do we direct our gaze? And also, do we not think that we've not already been sort of disrobed, you know?
Yeah, well, it does kind of speak to the infighting that we always talk about in liberal communities, where it's just we're not going to we can't take down the government, we can't dismantle capitalism, so we're going to get mad at the person with the unsavory opinion about that one thing because they're the easiest thing, and that will be satisfying in this very small way. We'll feel like we did something that day, as opposed to being able to, stop the NSA from collecting data on everyone in America. Right.
And we could have used those moments of the photos being leaked and being as a culture, that could have been a starter. This sucks, but hey, this is happening all the time. It's when I've talked about this on my show a bit, but it's and it's not to single Roxane Gay out, but it's when she scolded Neil Patrick Harris online for liking 3 billboards outside of Ebbing, Missouri, and she was like, "Your whiteness is showing."
Oh gosh.
And I thought, but Roxanne, like, you're holding this movie and everybody who likes it to a higher standard than the political candidates which you actively support. You are constantly upping certain politicians and leaving them blameless for many, many, many crimes. Why not call them out? You know? And so when you talk about like it's about finding the sort of smaller instances that we think we can control, for me it's like, of course, those instances have their own weight. And certainly if I'm in a relationship with someone and they do something shitty or racist or whatever in front of me, I'm going to be like, why the fuck did you do that? And I'm going to try to handle the situation. But in my worldly work, I want the right enemies. You know? Like, everybody deserves to have enemies. It's one of life's great pleasures, right? But you pick the correct ones. And if we had enough conversation, I mean, think about the power of someone, you know, who is as big a cultural figure as Roxanne Gay for a lot of people. I mean, she's not super, super famous or whatever, but, you know, saying like, you know, that movie was racist, but, you know, it's nothing compared to the racism that's enacted on blah, 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 right? I, first of all, didn't think the movie was racist, but I think if she would have turned it that way and said it, like, we can use these things as springboards to point at the real problems, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it feels almost like, and I see that a lot with art, like it seems like there's a single reading that is the acceptable reading, and any other reading is therefore like lesser. I mean, I just saw that with the Donald Glover video that just came out, like This Is America. Like people have opinions, and I think it's great, but like I've been seeing a lot of people saying like this is what that video means,
right?
And then it's like, so this is it's art, which means not really.
Well, right. It's like, so what history do you want to bring in? Like, it's important for you to bring your justice history in, sure, but like there's also art history. Like when it comes to any art that has any sexual stuff in, there's sexual history. There are all sorts of different histories here, and if you only know one, like, then you're crowding everything else out that could be included in this picture. And I think that again, it relates to what you said earlier. It's like, so in a world where we feel like we have zero consent in our lives, work or die. Work 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week or die. And by the way, work and die, because like we're going to work you down to the bone. We're going to give you shitty health care. We're not going to provide for your kids, right? Like, also, by the way, if you are, you know, of these and these and these groups, like the police will just shoot you indiscriminately whenever the fuck they want for doing whatever, you know, like, oh, by the way, we might go to war. Oh, by the way, like all this removal of consent. And then suddenly we have these hyper structured conversations about what appears in art and what happens in sexual spaces. And in fact, those spaces are really, really free and informative for what we can do in the world. They generate creative, imaginative responses. They redeem our pain. They can elevate our day and just make us feel happy. They can connect us to other people. But we direct so much attention to like, is Mad Max feminist or not? It's like, come the fuck on. There's like, no, that's a movie. And I don't mean that's a movie to dismiss it. I mean, what can you gain from this instead of like directing your political rage at this? You know, and I think that, and what can we learn from having complex encounters with sex and art instead of they're just the easiest targets in a world where our consent is taken away in every other sphere. Dope. I could talk to you for hours, and I'm sure that you are that kind of guy, but I should stop recording because we're just at an hour. So, Connor, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. This was lovely. Yeah.
You are way less frightening than the internet makes you look.
My tombstone will say hashtag he was nicer in person.
And that's it for this week's episode of Artgasm. As always, thank you so much for joining me. If you want to learn more and listen to more of Connor Habib's brilliance, you can follow him on Twitter at twitter.com/Connor Habib. That's ConnerHabib. Or you can find him on Patreon at patreon.com/Connor Habib. And a bunch of his writing and his podcast and all sorts of other things live at ConnorHabib.com. Again, ConnerHibib.com. And I really do strongly encourage you to follow and support him. I really love his brain. I love the kind of nuance and discourse that he's bringing to social media. And I certainly hope that more people are inspired to do the same. Meanwhile, you can follow me at artgasmcast.com or on Twitter at HeyAllieMoon, that's HeyAllieMoon, and you can support my Patreon at patreon.com/artgasm, that's PRTREON.com/artgasm. Until next time, bye.